Do you ever notice how everyone online is always like, be gay, do crimes, but then when it comes down to the specifics of what crimes we're actually supposed to be doing, everyone gets really apprehensive? When it comes to crimes that are obviously not victimless, the debate tends to come down to who it's okay to make a victim. Like, is it fundamentally different to steal from a mom and pop shop or to steal from Walmart? Maybe both are fine, maybe neither are fine, but in these cases, there's usually someone being negatively affected by it, even if marginally. I mean, we might be okay with that in some instances if we think the person being negatively affected either isn't being harmed that much or deserves it. But what I find even more interesting is these cases where people can't really seem to determine whether a crime is victimless or not. So, take something like art forgery. Someone makes a fake painting that looks like it could be a Jackson Pollock and sells it to a rich art collector. The forger makes a lot of money off of it, and the rich art collector gets to display it in their house and bask in the pride and amazement they get from their fellow rich people. Is that a victimless crime? Like, sure, you could say the art collector got cheated out of their money, but if they were willing to pay that amount for a genuine painting and it has zero effect on their life whether the painting was actually genuine or not, did they really? If you think on principle that that's just fundamentally a morally wrong thing to do, even if no one gets hurt, that's that. But if you're taking more of a utilitarian, whether it's right or wrong depends on the effect your action had on the world stance, that's pretty victimless, right? Alternatively, would it still be considered victimless if we weren't talking about a hoity-toity art collector, but maybe someone who doesn't have a lot of money and unknowingly spends a month's salary on a fake pair of Clyde Livingston sneakers? Suppose no one ever found out that they were fake. Is that victimless? Suddenly, a lot of you probably felt more uncomfortable about that example, even if the effect on the world were the same. This is the kind of ethical issue I like thinking about. These moral gray areas in illegal shit where it's hard to determine if someone's really being hurt at all. Like, if you pirate an album but you weren't gonna buy it anyway, no one's bottom line is really getting hurt, so does that make it okay? Does your answer change if you're talking about a super rich celebrity or a local singer-songwriter? To better understand these questions, I wanted to take a look at a subculture within a subculture that's dedicated to doing a crime, as well as the associated backlash. More specifically, I want to talk about the musical bootleg community and the culture it's created. I know, as soon as I said Broadway musicals, some of your hands immediately went to the close video button. I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to see a former theater kid who went for Halloween as sexy Alexander Hamilton talk about musicals for any amount of time either. But give me a chance, because this stuff can get pretty interesting. So let's take a look. For the uninitiated, here's a basic rundown of how bootlegs work. So first, some context on theater in general and why bootlegs are a thing. So most theater productions are meant to be seen live. Some shows, like Legally Blonde or Newsies, will be professionally filmed and released online, either for free or for the price of a DVD. Others are adapted into film mediums like Les Mis or Rent. This is pretty rare though. Most shows do get professionally filmed nowadays, but the recordings rarely actually get released. So in most cases, if you've listened to the soundtrack and want to see your favorite musical, you're probably gonna need to see it live. If you have money and live in like New York or London, you're pretty much Gucci. Otherwise, you'd better hope that you either have the money to travel or that you'll have the chance to see it either on tour or done by a local community theater group. Also, Broadway tickets are expensive, like really expensive. For a decently popular show like The Book of Mormon, one ticket can average about $200, with the best seats going for almost $500. If we're talking musical titans like Hamilton, you could wind up paying more than $800 a person for one of their best seats from the official website. Of course, as soon as tickets become available, people snatch them up to resell them for even more, so if you want a front row seat, you could easily be paying more than $1,000 for a few hours of entertainment. Assuming you're not going by yourself, be prepared to double that. That doesn't mean everyone going to see musicals is rich. The cheap seats tend to be a bit better, and there are ways to get deals and enter contests for free tickets, but like, on the whole Broadway culture tends to be fundamentally exclusive because of both the limited number of tickets and their high prices. This culture of exclusivity isn't incidental either. Broadway as a whole actively cultivates this "we're a select few who get to appreciate this art form" vibe. A number of Broadway actors, particularly people of color, have been pretty vocal about feeling systematically excluded from a very elitist culture. This tends to piss a lot of people off, partially because a lot of the narratives we're getting sold in these shows are about being scrappy and coming from poor backgrounds and still being able to succeed in life if given the same opportunity as everyone else. Like, Hamilton is literally the story of an immigrant coming from extreme poverty and managing to shape the future of an entire country, and yet almost no one who gets to see it live is remotely from that background. I am going to talk about Hamilton a couple times throughout this video, so to be clear, this isn't me dunking on Hamilton, although the entire show does have problems that, while not entirely relevant in the context of this video, should definitely be taken into consideration if assessing it holistically. And it is worth mentioning that the creator, Lin-Manuel Miranda, has certainly made efforts to make it somewhat more accessible, from free covers outside the theater to reserving a certain number of seats for his Puerto Rico show for Puerto Ricans so that the audience isn't entirely rich tourists. This culture of exclusivity and elitism surrounding theater isn't a problem with one specific show, and it's not something that would completely go away if Hamilton decided tomorrow to give away all their tickets for free. This is an overarching issue in the genre as a whole, not just a Hamilton problem. Just Hamilton is one of the most popular musicals to enter the general collective consciousness of non-Broadway fans, and it's an easy to understand example of the problem, which is why I talk about it. But it's just an example. This is a problem throughout Broadway. And this is where bootlegs come in. Bootlegs are secretive, illegal recordings of Broadway shows taken by fans and posted online. They're typically recorded on someone's phone or video camera, so they tend to be fairly low in quality. There are even audio bootlegs where people are only able to capture the audio of a show with no footage. These recordings have existed for a while. You can find bootlegs online of shows from the 80s and 90s, but with the rise in cell phones and social media, they're a lot more common now. There's also a pretty widespread community of people who take and distribute footage, since anyone with a cell phone and a +5 to stealth can do it now. In the past, though, this community was a lot smaller. There's a sort of legend in the Broadway community that almost all the old school bootlegs were taken by this one guy, a critic named Ken Mandelbaum, who would buy out entire rows for him and his friends and set up a camcorder. Legend has it, if you wanted an old recording of a show like Raggedy Ann, you'd need to get a hold of him. He hasn't really been heard from since 2007, leading most people to assume he's been banned from most theaters. But the days of these bootlegs mostly being owned by old theater critics are long past. In fact, nowadays, the majority of bootlegs tend to be made and shared by young people. Youths. The millennials. Gen Z? When you look at places where bootlegs tend to be shared, YouTube, Tumblr, Google Docs, even Pornhub, legit, the accounts sharing them nowadays are mostly teenagers and people in their 20s. This is interesting for a few reasons. So first of all, even though Broadway culture is certainly something elitist in a sense, a lot of Broadway shows have built up a huge following of young people who are decidedly not super wealthy. This is due in part to the massive popularity of bootlegs. When you look at which shows are the most popular with young people, it's shows that have recordings of them. So shows like Be More Chill, Wicked, Heathers, Hamilton, and Dear Evan Hansen have massive fan bases in part because of how accessible they now are. There are a few other reasons for the popularity of these shows, like relatability, but being able to experience not just the soundtrack, but also the dialogue and visuals certainly contributes. Like, Dear Evan Hansen fans can get a lot closer to Evan Hansen as a character if they get to see all of him. His dialogue, the actor's movements, how he looks, rather than just listening to the soundtrack. Also, because of the presence of social media among us youngins, these bootlegs spread much more quickly and much more widely than they did in the past. In the past, you'd need to get a bootleg from whatever specific person filmed it, and then you would just have that recording. If you wanted to make copies of it and share it with other people, you'd have a lot more trouble doing so. But nowadays, if someone makes a bootleg and posts it online, people are going to rush to download it to their own computers. If it gets copyright claimed or the bootlegger chooses to remove it, it's going to get re-uploaded by someone else very quickly. Even now, if I search like Be More Chill bootleg, I can very easily find multiple videos of the same recording on top of multiple different recordings. The original video of the Hamilton bootleg was taken down years ago, but if I decided right now that I wanted to watch Hamilton, I could find it in seconds. What that means is that we're kind of in a golden age of bootlegs. Even if I have no money to travel or see a show, I can watch recordings of almost any musical I want from the comfort of my own home whenever I want. So that's kind of how bootleg culture tends to work and who's the most involved in it. But of course, as with any other literal crime, there tends to be a lot of opposition and risk associated. This is in part because of the large number of people who really hate bootlegs. So where does that come into play? There tends to be a fairly significant divide here between creators and consumers when it comes to bootlegs. Kind of like the fans versus authors divide regarding fan fiction that I talked about earlier, Broadway writers and actors tend to be, as a general rule, opposed to the taking and consuming of these bootlegs for a variety of reasons. Now, I'm going to be completely open about my biases here. I completely disagree with this, and I think, yes, even though they are illegal and I would never make one myself, bootlegs do more good to Broadway as a whole than they do harm. You don't have to agree with this, and you're more than welcome to make your case against bootlegs in the comments, but I'm going to do my best to fairly represent the primary arguments that a lot of creators have against bootlegs, as well as why I disagree with those arguments. One of the main points of opposition against bootlegs is this idea that they're killing theater by damaging ticket sales. I mean, in theory, if you could just watch your favorite musical without paying whenever you wanted, why would you ever buy a ticket to do the same? I can understand that worry and frustration from the perspective of a creator. It's the same anxiety I feel when I find that someone has made all my Patreon posts public. By the way, whoever did that, I do know where you live and I am coming for you. But I think theater is fundamentally different from other forms of media in a way that doesn't make bootlegging shows the equivalent of like pirating someone's book or getting a backdoor into their Patreon. Notably, the fact that Broadway musicals are both physically inaccessible and prohibitively expensive for the vast majority of people means that most people who are viewing a bootleg are unable to see the musical in person in the first place. Plus, because there are a limited quantity of Broadway tickets per night, it doesn't represent any additional sales loss to a theater if an additional person views a sold-out show online. There was never a ticket available for them anyway. Also, unlike pirating a book, movie, or game where you get the full experience from pirating it and thus have no incentive to then buy the real thing, bootlegs are never going to be a substitute for the experience of live theater. Nobody watches like a tinny cell phone version of Hamilton and then thinks, man, now I have zero desire to see the real thing. If someone has the means to watch a show live, even if they've already seen a bootleg of it, they're still gonna want to experience the whole thing in full. In fact, for people who do have the means to buy tickets, bootlegs can make a show more accessible to people who might then choose to see it later. So take the musical Heathers. Its original 2014 off-Broadway run is fairly underwhelming and it closes in under 6 months. After it closes, someone posts a full video of the show online and it completely blows up in popularity. There's now a massive Heathers fandom, their social media becomes super active, and the show gets popular enough with teenagers that it can now make money off of high schools performing it. Then it gets a revival on the West End in 2018, which is massively popular. I saw it on the West End, and let me tell you, the audience was a bunch of teenage girls who went absolutely buck-fucking wild for the cast. Most of these people probably did not see the original off-Broadway run because almost nobody saw it and because they would have been babies. These are people who found out about the show through the bootleg. I know I did, and I'd hazard a guess that if no one had filmed Heathers, it probably would have died in relative obscurity. I certainly doubt it would have had the massively successful West End run that it did. I do also want to point out that if we're talking about money, the vast majority of Broadway's profits don't go to the writers and actors, but to hyper-wealthy producers who can make hundreds of thousands of dollars a week off of these shows, so just something to be aware of. There's also this idea that bootlegs are inherently damaging to the actual experience of seeing a Broadway show. Like, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who of course made Hamilton, has been pretty vocal about this in particular. The argument here is that if you see a low-quality bootleg of a show and that's your first exposure to it, you're somehow missing out on a significant part of the theater experience. You don't get the atmosphere, you don't get the little nuances, and you don't get the live experience. Once again, as a creator, I can understand this worry. When you work incredibly hard on something, of course you want people to see it exactly in the way that you intended for them to see it. It's the same problem that I talked about with regards to fanfiction in my rolling video, and it's part of the reason, even though I'm in a D&D podcast, that I will probably never successfully DM anything. What if I plan out this beautiful world and people don't do what I expected? That's terrifying. But once again, because bootlegs are often direct contributors to the popularity of certain shows, they can actually make people more likely to go buy a ticket for the show and thus more likely to experience it the proper way. There's also a distinct possibility that people who have already seen the show can watch the bootleg later to relive and reanalyze key moments. And to people who just don't have the means to see the original show period, that option was off the table anyway. At least this way, you're still getting your message and art out to more people. If you'd rather someone not experience it at all than have a mediocre experience now and potentially a great experience later, that's your prerogative. I don't know why I'm saying you, since I'm fairly certain Lin-Manuel Miranda is never going to watch this, and he has every right to be uncomfortable with bootlegs, just as I have every right to not be a dungeon master. But ignoring personal feelings of comfort, more people getting attached to a show via a video means more people wanting to see it. And if the stuff you're putting out into the world is indeed good, I think that puts more good out into the world. The final argument that I hear about bootlegs being bad tends to come not from creators, but from actors. And this is the argument that bootlegs are distracting to actors. I mean, if somebody is in the audience filming with these little blinking camera lights, that's super annoying and interferes with your ability to do your job. Again, as a former theater kid, I feel this hardcore. There are times I wish I could have broken character and just decked certain audience members for talking or for flash photography. I don't really have a counter argument to this one because, yeah, they are distracting, and this is a completely valid point, but I also think that these bootlegs kind of exist out of necessity. You can argue that no one is entitled to seeing a musical and all that, but the truth is, right now, Broadway relies on the excitement of young people who love these musicals largely because they've gotten to see bootlegs. These are the people buying the soundtracks to these shows, building up hype online, and yes, sometimes even buying tickets. These bootlegs are both helping the industry and making them more accessible. But yes, they are distracting to actors. You know what's not distracting to actors? Theaters professionally filming these shows and then releasing them online. Again, I argue that bootlegs right now exist out of necessity, and so the best way to curb bootlegs is to remove that necessity. So, let me bring to your attention the musical Legally Blonde, which I stan. Legally Blonde is one of the few musicals that's professionally filmed and available to watch online. It aired on MTV about 10 years ago, and as a result, anyone who wants to can watch it in high quality with captions and multiple good camera angles. Also, as a result, there are significantly fewer bootlegs of Legally Blonde than other shows. If you search up any show plus bootleg, you'll find a ton of recent ones. When you do the same for Legally Blonde, the most prominent results are all from 2007 before the professional filming, even though it's been on national tour as recently as 2018. Bootlegs exist because the inaccessibility of Broadway coupled with Broadway's reliance on young people has forced them to exist. I'm not saying they're good in every possible world, but in the world we live in today, bootlegs are one of the things bolstering Broadway and keeping it alive. There are problems with them. They are indeed distracting to actors, but if theaters and writers don't want bootlegs to exist, the best thing they could possibly do is to professionally film shows and release them online as soon as possible. They don't even have to be for free. Most people who are willing to pay for a musical soundtrack would be absolutely willing to pay the same amount for a high-quality recording of the same musical. But as of now, I'd strongly argue that bootlegs are a necessary inconvenience. Now, I've talked about bootlegs being posted on YouTube and other platforms, and this is definitely what's commonly done with them. But there are some people in the community who treat them as more of a currency than a commodity. What do I mean by this? Well, first of all, as bootlegs have risen in popularity, theaters' ability to detect and catch them has increased as well. If bootlegs are posted immediately after they're filmed, or at a performance where anything noteworthy happened, like an actor missing a line or an understudy being present, it gets pretty easy to tell when it was filmed and generally where the filmer was seated in the theater. And since bootlegs are in fact illegal and nobody wants to get sued or in legal trouble, a lot of people are pretty hesitant about publicly posting their bootlegs shortly after filming. So what a lot of people will do is they'll set a date where they won't share their bootleg until. In the meantime, if you want to see it, you have to pay for it. As a result, there's this massive sub-community within the bootleg community of traders, or people who will hoard bootlegs and then sell or trade them with each other to get the best ones the fastest. There are entire websites and subreddits dedicated to this, and people take it very seriously. Here's one user extremely upset because of people pooling their money to buy a bootleg, arguing that that puts too many copies of it out into the world. Depending on the popularity of the show and how available other bootlegs are, recordings can typically go for around $5 to $10. Sometimes people will sell their entire collections of bootlegs as a package, and that can go for $100 or more. So there's a sort of conflict here. Some members of the bootleg community who share people's bootlegs online on public forums have a vested interest in making as many of these recordings as accessible as possible, since their goal is to make sure the largest number of people possible can watch them and participate in fan culture. But members of the trading community have a significant incentive not to make them accessible, as that would mean the shows, which are used as a de facto currency, would then become less valuable. No one's gonna trade you for a show that they can go on YouTube and find. This can sometimes lead to suspicion amongst traders, as well as an unwillingness to sell their bootlegs for money rather than trade. If you trade with someone, they're probably a serious trader. They've probably got a good collection going on. But if the person you're selling to isn't an established trader, they might just post your bootleg on YouTube and there goes a source of income and trading power for you. That's part of the reason that some of these communities, like the Reddit forum for bootleggers, literally make you fill out applications, including listing what shows you own before letting you in. There's also somewhat of a debate on the topic within the community. If you're in the bootleg community, you've probably already decided for yourself that bootlegs themselves are morally okay. But even then, you have some people arguing that even if bootlegs themselves aren't inherently unethical, it's unethical to sell them as you're making money off of someone else's work. Some also argue that the whole point of bootlegs is to make theater more accessible rather than selling them for personal gain. A common rebuttal is, well, even if it's not technically legal, you're still doing labor and providing a risky service for other people when you spend a lot of money to see or record a show. It's entitled and wrong to suggest that people shouldn't be compensated for that. It's definitely a pretty big point of contention within these communities and speaks to a divide in terms of what people feel bootlegs should be for. Are they meant to be a limited commodity that you can trade for and get the best of, or are they meant to be a means of making a traditionally elitist interest accessible? In terms of which one is right, spicy discourse time, I'm inclined to agree that the value of bootlegs comes from their popularizing of shows that would otherwise be inaccessible and that can't really happen without them being widespread online. On the other hand, there is definitely significant risk associated with filming bootlegs, and asking people to do risky work for free really isn't a good look. I don't have a perfect solution, aside from maybe encouraging bootleggers to have some kind of a public donation page and then encouraging fans of the show to both financially support creators by buying merch and supporting bootleggers if they're able, but I think in order for bootlegs to exist as a vessel for good, they do need to be public to some degree. I also do think that this is kind of a systematically created problem that can't be looked at individually. I often see people getting mad at specific individuals for choosing to sell or trade bootlegs rather than posting them for free, since it seems like they're contributing to the same problem that bootlegs are intended to fix. But in the context of the wider system, they have a point. If a bootleg that they owned and could trade for suddenly got out there, they wouldn't be able to trade with it anymore, which could reduce their chances of getting to see other shows. But taking a broader look at it, if every single bootleg everyone ever owned was somehow magically posted to YouTube right now, this wouldn't matter anymore. Bootlegs as a whole wouldn't be a commodity that you needed to trade for, so there'd be no reason to keep your own guarded. If they were posted communally, as long as it was past the date where someone could conceivably get retroactively caught for filming, most people in the community would probably be better off. Since bootlegs are more often traded than sold, that applies to the person making the bootleg as well. If you're noticing any parallels to how capitalism works in general and why systemic problems require systemic solutions, yeah, exactly. That's part of what makes bootlegs a super interesting case study into how these communities develop. Much like one average middle-class person choosing to give away all their money and then spending their life cleaning parks wouldn't fix the wider system, the bootleg community has created its own capitalistic niche in order to sustain itself. Again, I don't have a perfect solution to the problem here, except for, theater companies just posting professional recordings so bootlegs don't have to exist in the first place, but I think this is just innately interesting as a case study into how profit motives can turn a community ostensibly based on improving accessibility into its own microcosm of capitalism. Like Broadway's elitism and view of musicals as a resource that only a select few should be able to access is the exact problem bootlegs are supposed to fix, but then the exact same problem of resource hoarding and the need for only a small number of people to be allowed to access any given musical happens nevertheless. I think under capitalism, this is something that happens to all kinds of communities, even ones actively devoted to combating some of capitalism's worst offenses. Once again, talked about this in another video, but Angie Speaks made a great video talking about how this happens in social justice communities, but this is another example of how this kinda happens everywhere. Overall, the bootleg community is a really great example of how this can happen and a reminder to be cautious of it. The musical bootleg community is a fascinating place. Historically, it's comprised official film critics selling physical records all the way to 13-year-olds watching a YouTube recording of their first Broadway show. The ethics of whether bootlegs are a help or a hindrance to the musical theater community in general has been fiercely debated, and indeed answers vary widely even amongst actors and writers. Particularly interesting is the parallel that's developed between Broadway's exclusionary practices and the issues with resource hoarding that have happened among some Broadway bootleggers. Are the same issues of financial disparity and open access occurring in slightly different forms, or is it overkill? Essentially, this is a great case study of why, in any community, simply saying you're against bad stuff like resource hoarding or harmful behavior isn't enough. Instead, we have to remain active in fighting against toxic attitudes and behaviors lest our own communities become exactly like the things we're trying to fight against. I hope this has given you something to think about. Before we end the video, I do want to remind everyone that I'm in a super cool D&D podcast with my good friends called Trials and Trebuchets. It takes place at a magic school. It's very fun. I was gonna say it's lighthearted. It is for the most part, but like, it's getting real. Tone's getting a little darker. It's a good time. You should check it out. And I do have a link in my description to our RSS feed and our social media. But don't take my word for it that the podcast is good. Take my sister's.
Oh, hello there. I didn't see you. I'm Alexandra. I'm Sarah's older, better sister. And I'm here to tell you to listen to her podcast. It is a Dungeons & Dragons podcast called Trials and Trebuchets. And you can find it anywhere that podcasts are available. It's very exciting, very good stuff. Definitely give it a watch. Listen. Definitely give it a listen when you have the chance. No worries if it's not today. I haven't bothered either.
Sorry, what?
What?
I didn't hear you for a second. What did you say?
Definitely give it a listen. It's fantastic. It's exciting. It's action. It's Christopher Walker.
Who's Christopher Walker?
What? You don't know who Christopher Walker is?
I know who Christopher Walken is.
That's totally...
Is this like his evil brother?
That's totally who I meant. Here I was gonna chastise you for not knowing pop culture.
No, it is you who knows not the pop culture.
Just the R's and the N's are sometimes an issue. There must be somebody named Christopher Walker out there. Christopher Walker.
We're gonna find Christopher Walker. Please guest star on this podcast.
But yeah, have at her.
Is that how you're gonna end it? You heard my older, better sister. Have at her. Trials and Trebuchets D&D podcast takes place at a magical school, available on every podcast app. I have a sticker of it on my laptop. I was gonna say I have a laptop of it on my sticker, which I guess is also a statement that a person could say if they wanted to.
Available for the simple price of $000. To find out more, give it a listen. D&D,
TNT. And that's a wrap.
How's that one?
That was great.
Let's look at it.
Okay. On top of a thank you to all my patrons, I would like to specially thank Phobos2390 and Yvonne for joining my $20 plus Patreon tier. Welcome. Listen to my podcast, please.